Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money Podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Scott Carson. Scott is the president of We Close Notes and host of the Note Closer Show podcast. In this episode, we'll be discussing Scott's insights on how we change the way we think about money and real estate investing. Scott, welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Tony, honored to be here as always. Thank you for having me, bud.
Yeah, now looking forward to this. So, to start out, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story?
My origin story, I fell into a vat of toxic waste a few years ago, got bit by spiders. No. I call Austin, Texas home. I'm known across the country as the note guy, which is a little bit different. I'm basically in the mortgage space, but on a different side of it instead of originating, I'm on the de-origination side of things. But I've been a active real estate investor for 20 years, previous financial advisor, previous banker for JP Morgan Chase, Bank One, and Citibank. And for the last almost 20 years, I've focused on the niche of buying distressed mortgage notes, direct from banks and hedge funds. And that's kind of my origin story is we buy this distressed debt from banks at big discounts, and then we work to try to modify the borrowers who are falling behind on payments in one form or fashion to keep them in their houses. And if they can't come to the table, we can't have a soft landing for them to start paying their mortgage on time. So we try to work a way to get them to walk away from the property with some grace and dignity without having to go through the foreclosure process. And so over the last, like I said, almost 20 years, we bought over $1 billion in distressed debt, and then also helped thousands of real estate investors redefine the way that they invest in real estate and cash flow by coming to the dark side of real estate, or the sexy side of real estate, is called, by becoming a note and debt buyer.
Cool. Well, let's go a little bit deeper on that. What is a note?
So everybody's in the note business already for the most part. If you've got a mortgage on your house, a car payment, student loan debt, credit card, you owe your cousin Bubba down the street $500 from Thanksgiving bet on a Cowboys game. You're in the note space. You have an IOU. That's what a note is. It's a debt, a receivable. Promise to pay, an IOU. And I focus on mortgage notes, where people have mortgages on their property, their homes and vacation homes, and then also commercial properties.
That's awesome. Well, that's really helpful, because I think people hear these terms and, they're like, okay, I feel like I should know that. Right. Now, if you have somebody like your cousin Bubba, who you've bet $500 with on the Cowboys game, and Bubba decides not to pay you back because he's just that kind of friend, is that a non-performing note?
That's a non-performing note. You could sell that debt to your buddy Guido at 50 cents on the dollar and get $250, and Guido can go collect on the $500. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's what you get for betting on the Cowboys, right?
Yeah, exactly. They actually decided to win a game for once this year. But it's a little bit different things. If you've owned a house and had a mortgage on your house before, you've probably gotten a letter from your existing lender at some point that your loan was sold, from Chase Bank to ABC Bank, or from ABC Bank to Citizens Bank, or something like that. It happens all the time. What most people don't realize is that individual investors like me can actually buy that debt as well. You don't need to have $5 or $10 million or more to buy from banks. We buy a lot of smaller stuff, a lot of individual notes. I was just doing a video a second ago. We're buying a note in Dayton, Ohio. The borrower owes $40,000, hasn't paid in 3 years, and we're buying that note for $25,000 on a $140,000 house. Our goal is to get the borrower back on track. If they start paying on time again on a monthly basis, that's about a 20% cash and cash return to us, which is pretty good. If they don't pay I'm the lender. I have the same rights as the bank did that made that loan to foreclose if they don't play ball. Now they only owe 40. So if I foreclose, I'll sell it at the auction and I'll make about a $15,000 profit on my $25,000 investment, which is not bad. But if it doesn't sell at auction, now I will own that real estate and own that property, which is about $130,000, $140,000 house that I picked up for 25. Our goal, though, is not to really own the house. I don't want to be a property owner. I would actually prefer to keep people in their houses and get the cash flow without dealing with toilets, tents, and trash outs. I could obviously turn this into a rental if I want, but I don't like to do that. I like being in the note space and being on the banking side of real estate.
So what does We Close Notes do then? Do you consolidate the debt for investors that they can buy in a pool? Are they buying individual notes?
Yeah, great question. When we started doing this stuff back in 2008, we started getting lists of notes sent to us from big institutions, and people didn't understand what a note was. Right? They was like, "Well, is that a property?" I'm like, "No, you can't. You're not buying the property. You're buying the debt. To take the property back, you got to finish the foreclosure process." So we started teaching this niche of note investing. That's what We Close Notes is. It's kind of our education arm that our podcasts and our webinars and our classes fall under. But we've been teaching investors how to actually buy debt and who to talk to. Now you're not going to buy from like Bank of America, Chase, or Citi. If you're listening to this podcast, you're behind on your mortgage, don't call me up and say, "Scott, I want you to buy my mortgage." Okay?
Yeah.
We get plenty of those. But we're tapped into thousands of different banks and institutions that do have debt that they'll give us these lists that we can cherry pick. And so we teach investors how to either go out and identify opportunities on these lists, or if they don't want to do the work themselves, they can do it passively by investing with us. And we'll give them a decent return on their money for 12 to 36 months while we work through the asset, get the bar back on track, and then either foreclose or sell that now reperforming note back to Wall Street.
Okay. So, I think the big question that comes to mind for me and probably for some of the listeners is, are you a debt collector then? Or is that part of the role? Do you outsource to a debt collector?
Yeah, I'm basically a debt collector. I'm basically a lender, and there are debt collector licenses that you need to have in specific states. The kind of get out of jail card is that if you are buying notes and have your notes with a licensed servicing company who's licensed to collect debt in that specific state where the loan is, that'll solve your licensing requirements about 75% of the time. So we buy it in a lot of those states that we don't have to go get a separate license. States like Illinois, Massachusetts, North Carolina, they want you to have a separate, license, debt collector's license on top of the servicing license, and that's okay. It costs you a couple $100. But for the most part, when we buy a non-performing note, we're going to board it with a servicer who's licensed in that state and pay them anywhere from like $25 for a performing note all the way up to like $90, $95 for them to handle the collections, the borrower outreach, the collecting of payments, the sending out of statements, to making sure that they're Dodd-Frank compliant, and that they're kind of our buffer in communicating with the borrower. So they're talking with the borrower, collecting information. We're going to obviously let the servicer know which way we want the story to go. We'd like them to do A, B, or C before we get to D. So that's the great thing, is that we have, vendors all across the country that are working on our behalf to control it. So it's kind of almost a passive investment for a lot of folks that want to get into real estate but don't want all the hassles of rehabbing or dealing with tenants. They can have buy performing paper that's just paying them on a monthly or quarterly basis directly and have a third-party servicer who's collecting it and doing all the heavy lifting for them.
Well, that's cool. And I think for some of our listeners is, there are funds that you can buy that do similar things, that purchase distressed debts. Now, this can be a higher risk investment, so neither Scott nor I is endorsing this or making any promises or obligations or throwing in every single disclosure that you can think of, that this is purely for educational purposes.
Exactly. And here's the biggest, you don't just go invest in something because you heard something on a podcast. I can't tell you how important that is. You really, no matter what you're investing in, you got to learn about that type of niche, whether it's crypto to NFTs, baby. Let's learn some, to fix and flip and rentals, or in my world, not note investing. whether it's performing or non-performing. Non-performing is what I buy most of the time. That's where somebody hasn't paid their mortgage in a period of time, and we get a bigger discount for that. But then we have to either go through the route of foreclosing or really doing some heavy lifting and working out with the homeowner to get them back on track on a payment plan. But that's why we start teaching classes and do so much online with our YouTube channel and our podcast, because it is a niche. People don't know about it. Many of folks in our age may have watched, Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner and James Earl Jones, and that's actually a movie about the note being sold, a note story. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's right. I forgot that's the core of it.
The note gets sold from his brother-in-law at the bank to investors who are going to wipe him out, plow under the cornfields. And he's trying to save the family farm. I mean, there's a bunch of stories. The Big Short with Christian Bale, is another great movie that I love. Is kind of more of an example of what I do, looking at spreadsheets a lot of times and then doing our due diligence to identify deals from the duds and finding good deals, not only for my stuff, but also for our investors and our students.
Yeah, that's awesome. And those are two great movies. The Field of Dreams, I always think of, was it Shoeless Joe Jackson coming out of the cornfield?
That's correct, baby. That's correct.
So great movie.
R.I.P. James Earl Jones, who just passed away here recently, but
he
the
was
voice
awesome.
of Darth Vader.
Yeah. So now here's the flip side, and I think this might be helpful to a lot of listeners. So for the people who are struggling in debt and, trying to work through do you have any tips for them on what they can do?
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked that, because no matter what the talking heads say how great America is doing and the economy is doing, the stock market's doing great, but a lot of Americans are struggling to get behind. We are seeing an increase in people defaulting on their mortgages, defaulting on car payments, student loan debt, credit card. Default rates of that stuff are all up across the board. First-time home buyers on like VA loans or FHA loans is one of the highest default rates. And here's the thing. Before you ever buy a house, if you're buying a brand new house, look at what your tax rate is going to be. A lot of people default on their mortgage after the first year. They're buying a new home because the tax basis is just on the lot, not on the improvements in the land. So in states like Texas, Wisconsin, Florida that have high property taxes, that can kill you once your property is reappraised and now it has a new tax rate, and you're not expecting your payment to go up by $300-$400 a month, okay, or more in some cases. If you are behind and you're because you've been laid off, your hours have been reduced, you're going through the big D and don't mean Dallas, the best thing you can do is reach out to your lender and tell them what's going on. Many of these lenders have programs, especially since we saw it happen in COVID, where they're allowing you to do a forbearance agreement, maybe skip a couple months of payments that doesn't initially hurt your credit score, to give you some opportunity to get back on track. Because the last thing they want to do, the last thing the bank really wants to do is actually take your property back. Okay. But communicate with your lender, tell them what's going on. We talk with our borrowers a lot of times, our servicer does, and there are things that we are willing to do. We're willing to give them a 90-day forbearance agreement to allow them to get back on track. We're allowing them to maybe split up their payments to twice a month versus once a month. It's changing. There's a lot of things you can do to get back on track. A lot of states out there, if you're struggling, look for any type of rental assistance programs. A lot of times they have programs to help you pay your mortgage. There are different community organizations that will also kind of step in and help pay, depending on what state you're in. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but check with your local state and talk with them. I mean, there's modification companies, there's organizations will sometimes pay up to 6 months of your mortgage payment to keep you in your house or more, depending on what's going on. And of course, you got to qualify for that stuff. But communicate with your lender, talk with them, let them know what's going on. The worst thing you do is hide your head in the sand and not call them, and then they're going to be forced to start the foreclosure process.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is for people to not despair, is that you may have a lot of options, but it's always the worst option with anything is hiding your head in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
So getting started, figuring out the options, like you said, you just listed 5 or 6 different options that might apply for people. So that's the thing. Don't not deal with it.
We've got a
That's the
deal
worst
right
thing
now.
you can do with your money.
Yeah, we've got a lady right now on a deal. It's not my deal. It's one of my students' deals. And this lady lives in Round Rock. She's lived in this house for years. The house is worth about $400,000. Okay, conservatively. Okay, she owes about 75,000, but hasn't paid in 2 years. She just doesn't have the money to pay. And my buddy Cal, who bought the note at a big discount, he's willing to work with her. He's like, "How can I help you?" He bought it. If she just pays off the mortgage, he's going to be a good day for him. But she doesn't have the money to do that. She can't go qualify for a traditional new mortgage. Now, what she could qualify, because she's old enough, she could go get a reverse mortgage and pull some of this equity out of the deal and not have to pay a mortgage payment and not have to pay anything. Her heirs would be required to pay off the loan, but she could qualify for that. It's not based on credit score. So Cal's trying to work with her to get her to go through that route, but she's not wanting to do it. And so I'm like, well, you could always just give her some cash for keys, give her some of her equity so that she can move on and not have to be dealt with this burden. So that's what they're trying to work with right now. I was once a distressed borrower. I once was facing foreclosure years ago with my first house back in 2001. So I have a lot of empathy for people that are struggling to get by and can't make their mortgage payment. We were able to, by the skin of my teeth, be able to modify and keep my primary residence and go from there. And so I understand when people are struggling to get by. Things are a lot more expensive these days, and the holidays make it even worse. All right. So just don't hide. Here's the best thing: talk to somebody. Pick up if you know a mortgage broker, know a real estate agent. Pick up the phone and call them. The worst thing we want to do as real estate professionals is find out that one of our friends is losing their house when they could have picked up the phone and called us, and we could have helped advise them to stay in their house, keep their mortgage, or if they have a ton of equity, be able to get out of that house without a foreclosure and still putting some cash in their pocket. Because if it goes to foreclosure, that's a crapshoot. You never know what's going to happen at a foreclosure auction. And once you go that far, the bank's not really willing to work with you because you haven't had engaged in correspondence and communicating and telling them what's going on.
That's awesome advice. And to give people a little bit of context too, I would add, this is why it's important to look at the different areas of your financial plan, because you might have some other areas that you might be able to change that could impact your ability to pay your mortgage. So it's not only, we're talking about focusing right here on paying off your mortgage, but, this is your overall debt strategy, your savings strategy. You may have some other assets you can tap into that maybe it makes sense. Like normally you don't want to borrow from your 401k plan, but maybe in this kind of instance, it does make sense. So you protect your credit rating, you don't get in trouble and lose your house, is that you need to take a look at all areas of your financial life and start to understand how they work together. So Scott, the next section is we're going to run into what I call the get ready questions. These are quick fire questions I ask all my guests. The first one is, what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
Oh my gosh. Do we have all day?
Only, I think we have 14 hours left.
Okay, so 14 hours. I think I can answer the one. So the most basic money principle is something I learned as a 24-year-old kid, and it's the rule of 72, the rule of compound interest, that if you take the interest rate that you're getting on an investment and divide that into 72, the number that it gives you will tell you how long it takes that investment to double. So if you're getting 6% on a certificate of disappointment, a 401k or something like that, 6 divided into 72 goes 12 times. So it will take 12 years for that $10,000 CD making 6% to double to 20,000. And so that's one of the most important values, I think, is learning that number and the power of compound interest. Now, it also works against you. All right. If you've got a credit card at 24%, like many of them are right now, that means that your balance on your credit card is doubling every 3 years if you're not paying it off. So understand that concept. It was one of the most eye-opening things out there. And then, of course, plan B would be to pay yourself first.
I love it. So for people who are watching and listening to this podcast, as I say every time, because I would say probably at least 75% of my guests mention the power of compounding interest. I hope that you understand that this is why they continue to mention it, because this is one of the most fundamental things that can help you. But I'm also glad because not many guests talk about how it can also work against you. with your debt. So that, again, that's why you take a look at everything and see how it all works. So appreciate you mentioning that. So Scott, what is one simple thing people can do each year to set themselves up for financial success?
Oh, that's very simple. Just start putting money away. A lot of us, I literally had this conversation with a guy yesterday on a podcast. People often think about how they need to have like $4 million saved, and that seems like the impossible dream. I think 66% of Americans are giving up on the idea of retirement because they say, I got 50 grand, I don't have $4 million. Well, if you look back at little simple decisions each day, and if you get in the habit of, like I said, paying yourself first, putting money away each month, $100 a month or $100 a week or something like that, give it time and it will compound. As we talked about, it will grow faster than expected. A lot of people give up on the idea of their dreams, but there are ways to make 6, 10, 12% that don't have to be in banking issues that can help you grow your nest egg and help you compound. The idea is, and one of the great things that Tony's doing with this podcast is providing a whole variety of different knowledge and information on those different things to help you grow. But plan. Failing to plan is planning to fail first and foremost. So sit down with a professional. If you don't have a game plan, get with somebody. Even if you're just starting off, it's never too late. And it's only going to get worse if you delay and keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I love it. And that gets back to what you were talking about earlier with debt. And for everybody watching and listening, if you're not aware, you can go to my website, join the Get Ready Money Club. You'll receive a weekly action item that covers over the course of the year your entire financial life, so you can start to see what's going on with different parts of your financial life. So appreciate that advice. So the next question is, what is one habit that people can change when it comes to their money?
Well, I will tell you this. Some people would probably talk about money, but I would say it's probably health.
All right.
And I only say that because I've dealt with some health issues in the past, and I've worked hard to get beyond that, being diagnosed with diabetes and working to reverse that like I have in the last 24 months. We were only given one vessel, and you got to take care of that vessel of your spirit, and that's your health. And we're not talking going to the gym and being buff like Arnold Schwarzenegger and or the two guys from Saturday Night Live. Where do you get the pump? You up?
Oh,
okay?
Man, that's going back.
We're talking about making conscious efforts to take care of yourself. Go for a walk. Get outside from behind any screen. Get up a little bit. Like I just got back from walking about actually 6.2 miles this morning. It's one of the things I do every morning is I get up and walk for an hour or two. That's one of the best things. And then just adjusting what you eat, because your body if you want to live for 85 to 100, you got to take care of that vessel you're in. If you're putting bad things in, you're going to get bad things out, and you're just going to cut your life, especially shorter. You're going to have more costs when it comes to insurance and more health issues. And that's the best thing I can do. Be preventative for your future self. Your future self will thank you for taking that walk today. They're not going to care about how many videos on TikTok that you liked.
Exactly. Well, and there's a lot of talk. I don't know if you've heard it about a wealth span. So, many people are concerned about how long their wealth is going to continue, but a lot of times their health runs a lot shorter because they haven't taken care of it, and they don't enjoy those last few years of their life where they've saved all this money, but then they can't do anything to enjoy it.
Yeah, nobody likes, working 40 years to then retire and not be able to enjoy it, not be able to go out and travel and walk or spend time with your loved ones. That's more sad than anything else. You can't take your money with you. But getting out and making memories is one of the things that my dad really drove into my head. And his last couple of years were difficult because he was basically been diabetic for 20 years, congestive heart failure. And he always talked about making memories, but his last 2 years were very miserable because he just wasn't healthy. Couldn't get out and do things, and it really drained the energy out of him and the joy out of life in a lot of cases. So I think that's one thing that drives me the most, is not to end up like that. My dad was my hero. Bless his soul, rest in peace. I just want to be a healthier man when I turn 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. That's great advice. So what money myth are you trying to break?
Ooh, the money myth. This is the big thing here. This is something I've been preaching for about 20 years, I like to say, is let's talk about banking. Let's just talk about banking and what banking does and change the myth up for that. So you go put money in a bank, and a bank has, and I say this because I was brainwashed working for a bank will tell you that, 1 to 4% is safe. 48% return is kind of moderate, and then anything 12% or greater is risky. Yeah, in some cases. But if you do some research, what the bank is wanting you to do is put money into your savings or certificate of disappointment account, and they're going to pay you 1%, maybe 2 or 3 if you put 100 grand in for 10 years. They're going to take that money and go out. They're glad to give you 1% because they're going to go out and make 6 to 7% on mortgage interest rates, 10% on auto loans, 24 to 29% on credit card debt. And they're glad to give you that 1%. And they're making at least 5 times that or 32 times that in profit. So why banks are the biggest. Look at something. You are not solely resilient on the banks to go do some things. I mean, that's part of what I love about real estate investing. Of course, you need to pick a niche. There's private lending that you can do. There's a whole lot of things you can do to make an above average return. And that was the biggest thing that was my eyes were eye-opened years ago after reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and a few other things is don't just invest in bank. Because look, we all want to save, but here's the only thing. Jesus saves, everybody else has to invest. Okay?
Yeah. Well, what is Jesus investing in? I think that's a bigger.
Right.
Sorry for anybody listening. I'm not trying to insult anybody's.
No, we're not. It's a joke. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Like, you have to be responsible for where you're at. You have to take responsibility for your actions or lack of inactions, and just look to change the course. Everybody. That's the great thing about us living in the United States. No matter what your political authority is, and if you're happy or sad based on the election, it doesn't matter. What happens in DC is probably not going to affect you that much. You have the most control over what you're doing day in, day out. And that means whether it's putting $5 away or $500 away towards your future life and other things, you are solely in control of your spaceship called life. Okay.
I love that. You're in charge of your life and you're in charge of your money. So Scott, let's get out the time machine for a minute. What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time knowing what you know now about money?
Oh, start early. Start early, and save more. That would be the biggest things. I think a lot of kids, I mean, I hustled. I've worked since I was like 12, 13. I grew up in the local hardware store my parents owned, and I would work on the weekends for people mowing lawns, clearing brush, had buddies that worked for me. And as kids, we get kind of we get the idea about, oh, I'm going to go buy the new pair of Jordan sneakers, or I'm going to go buy the new radio or the new CD or the tapes decks, back in those days. And that's great. I wish somebody would sit down and taught me more about, hey, you could invest. You can start putting money away into an ESA for your college education, 529 plan, or you could start putting money into a Roth IRA because you're making more. I think those things are some of the most critical things that you can teach our younger generation, and none of it's taught in high school. It needs to be taught before that, because kids often learn money habits from their parents, who are often, unfortunately, some of the most financially uneducated people out there. Not bashing them, it's just a hereditary disease that we can cure by teaching the proper tools and how to make money last and how to invest properly.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I'm going to give a quick shout out to a tool from a friend of mine with giftingsense.org. I'll put the link in here, and she has a Does It Make Sense score calculator for kids to see if whether to buy something or not makes sense. So I was trying to write my note while I was talking, and that didn't work out.
That's okay. It's good to put that note down for guys like you and me, so we don't forget to put it in the show notes for sure.
Exactly. We take notes. Maybe that.
That's the next invention of We Close Notes for sure.
Exactly. We take notes. So Scott, what is your number one go-to favorite money resource, whether it's a podcast, book, newsletter, app, or website? What's the one thing you go to?
Wow, that's another long list. If we're talking just basic kind of knowledge advice, your podcast is phenomenal. I also love, you're welcome. I also love the Stacking Benjamins podcast. Josal Sehi is a buddy of mine. We've had him on the show. He had me on his Stacking Deets podcast when it was around, and they've pivoted to a new direction that way. FinCon is a conference that I love going to once a year. It's where money and marketing meet, and I'm surrounded by 2,000 other money nerds in different niches, and I could learn something from them. And that's been probably one of the most valuable things in the last 3 or 4 years is going to FinCon and getting a chance to network and meet amazing individuals like yourself and others out there, and learn what they're doing in their niches. And when I need an expert on a field that I'm not an expert in, I'm able to reach out to them and truly get counsel. One bit of advice I would tell folks out there: if you're looking for advice or counsel on something, don't go to your family. All right. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. And if your family member is not doing the things you're trying to do or trying to accomplish, they're not the right person to go to. You want to go seek somebody who's in the position that you want to be or is an expert in that and actually get their counsel, not their advice. Much more valuable than just asking your cousin Bubba who you owe $500 to about buying a term policy or investing in real estate or whatever it might be. Go talk to the experts. It'll be well worth your time.
I love that because I think people overlook that is, you have to consider the source of whoever's giving the advice are they qualified to give the advice? It's just like, would you take medical advice from your cousin? Probably not. You'd go, and find somebody who knows what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah. He cousin Bubba, if he can't fix it with Miller Lite, Windex, and some duct tape, he ain't dealing with it.
But I used to do outdoor sports, and that was the thing. Duct tape was always our number one go-to. Use duct tape for everything, but it's not always the best solution. It's temporary. No, it's not. So to close out, what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
Number one tip about how to do it is first get educated. Read, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos. It can be overwhelming. Let's put it that way. Very overwhelming, especially if you're behind the eight ball and getting started a little bit later in life, or are just awakened to new financial concepts. That's what I love about your year-long and your newsletter, Tony, with you doing focus on one thing each month, and then the emails that go along with it. Life is like an onion. There's different layers to it, and you're going to hit different layers depending on where you're at, where you live, and what you do for a living. The best thing I can tell you is just get educated, read books, read podcasts. You just start going out there. We have so many opportunities to learn and change the direction you're in here in the United States and others. So go do it. If you're not happy with where you're at, guess what? Go change it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great advice. So Scott, where can people find out more about you? Where can they tune into the Note Closer Show?
Yeah, our podcast is on any of the podcasting platforms out there, but you can go to weclosenotes.com as our main website. That'll give you access to our podcast, our educational stuff. If you'd like to learn more about note investing, we have a free class that we give away to folks. It's kind of a teaser, kind of the Cliff Notes version of our 3-day longer class. If you go to noteweekend.com, that's noteweekend.com, you can sign up for the free class, catch the replays, the last one we taught. It's usually $99, but we're giving away for free for you. No credit card required, 3.5-hour class. That's a great way to start feeling if notes are right for you. Of course, if you have any questions about investing or real estate, stuff like that, I'm always available by going to talkwithscottcarson.com. Book a call with me. I'm always glad to help answer any questions you might have or point you in the right direction if I don't know the answer.
That's awesome. And for everybody watching and listening, as always, there will be links to all of these resources in the show notes. So you can connect with Scott. You can tune into the Note Closer Show. Check out the free course. So Scott, thanks again for joining us today on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Tony, it has been an honor as always, buddy. Looking forward to continuing the conversation at a later date. And for those of you guys listening out there, we as podcasters, we love you to do one thing. Go over Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening, and leave a 5-star review for Tony. We love to see those things. It tells us we're doing a great job. And leave a note, leave a comment. If you're not going to leave a 5-star review, bug off and go do something else. But 5-star review and leave a comment. That'll be great for us to see what you like. And like I said, Tony's kicking ass and taking names of this podcast, and we love to hear feedback.
Well, that's awesome. And I appreciate the warm words, Scott, and appreciate your time. And yeah, if you can leave a positive review, it really does matter and helps us out and allows us to continue providing this great content. And so thank you, as always, for tuning into this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today, as Scott mentioned, please leave a review, tell a friend, subscribe. You know the things to do. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.